Tonight we have a tale of a man who thought he was spinning a web of deceit, only to find himself caught in a stickier situation than he had bargained for. He loved him and left him 6 feet under, that is. But this time, our groom is about to discover his blushing bride has a few secrets. Get ready for a honeymoon that's truly to die for. You know, it's funny. Most folks walk around with this gaping heart-shaped hole in their chests, just begging for someone to come along and fill it, or at least pretend to, long enough for the ink to dry on the right forms. That's where I come in, Gerald D. Frampton, at your service. Though the D could stand for deceased spouse collector, if we're being frank, which, between you and me, we are. I've always seen myself as something of an artist, really, a sculptor of circumstance, a connoisseur of loneliness. It's a delicate craft, nudging fate just so. There was Ashley, poor dear, always a bit clumsy on the stairs, a loose runner, a poorly lit landing. Tragic, really. Collected a neat 50 grand on that one. Then there was Mary, who could never resist a midnight swim after a bit too much Chardonnay. The lake was deep, the night was dark. Another tragedy, another tidy sum. They call it fraud. I call it accelerated inheritance. A service, in a way. I provide companionship, a brief flicker of warmth, and in return, they provide for my future. It's a symbiotic relationship, if you squint. My self-perception isn't one of a common criminal. I see myself as possessing a unique talent, a grandiose sense of self-importance, if you will, that allows me to exploit others without the inconvenient baggage of guilt or shame. It's not my fault they're so accommodating. I simply identify a need and I fill it, and if that leads to their unfortunate yet financially beneficial demise, well, who's to say I'm not just an instrument of some larger, crueler design? I certainly don't accept personal responsibility for their little accidents. They were merely unfortunate yet necessary steps in my rather unique career path. Heather Vance. Now she was a masterpiece waiting to happen. I first saw her at a dreary auction house, the kind where old money goes to shed its skin. She was bidding on some morbidly sentimental Victorian locket, her face pale and sorrowful, like a porcelain doll left out in the rain. But it wasn't her melancholy beauty that snagged my attention, not entirely. It was the whispers that clung to her like expensive, moth-eaten silk. Blackwood Manor, they called her ancestral home. Perched up on Harrow Hill like a carrion bird watching a field mouse scurry towards a trap. And I, my friends, was feeling decidedly mousy in the most promising way imaginable. The rumors were intoxicating. Vaults, they said, filled with cash. Old money, the kind that doesn't bother with banks. Generations of the stuff, moldering away in the dark. She wasn't just rich, she was legendarily rich. The kind of score that would set a man up for life. No more tedious courtships, no more carefully staged mishaps. The challenge of it, the sheer audacity required, is saying to that part of me that knows I'm smarter, more capable than the common herd. Heather Vance and her shadowed mansion became my Everest, and I, as you know, am an excellent climber. The courtship, if you could call it that, was a masterclass in manufactured serendipity. A chance encounter at a dusty bookshop where I'd discovered a shared passion for obscure Jacobean poets. An accidental meeting at a somber art gallery displaying works of unsettling bleakness. I became a mirror reflecting her quiet sorrows, her intellectual pursuits. You see, I could be anyone, you see. That's the gift. It's a skill, this chameleon act, honed over years of practice, a key tool for any successful manipulator. Heather was receptive in her own distant way. Her smiles were rare, tinged with an unreadable sadness that I, of course, interpreted as profound loneliness, a vulnerability ripe for exploitation. She seemed to drift through her days, a ghost in her own life. Perfect. The more fragile the bird, the easier to pluck. My internal monologue was a symphony of contempt. Even as I murmured words of feigned understanding and affection, she lapped it up, of course. They always do. A little charm, a well-placed sigh of understanding gets them every time. My confidence swelled. This was just another game, and I was, as always, winning. My first visits to Blackwood Manor were very memorable. The place wasn't just old, it was freaking ancient. Steeped in a silence that felt heavier than lead. Sunlight, when it dared to penetrate the grimy, leaded windows, seemed to die on the dark wood floors. Shadows sung to the corners of vast, high-ceiling rooms like cobwebs spun by spiders the size of dinner plates. There was a persistent smell, too. Dust, certainly, and the faint, sweet rot of decaying fabric, but something else underneath all that. Something faintly metallic, almost acrid, like old blood or something else. The floorboards groaned underfoot like the bones of something long dead. But what's a bit of gloom, a few unsettling creaks when there are rumored millions at stake? My greed, as always, was an effective blindfold. It was during my third visit, a dreary Tuesday afternoon, that I first heard them, the children. I hadn't even known she had any. She'd never mentioned them. It wasn't the sound of ordinary children crying. This was a thin, reedy wail, almost a keening, like wind whistling through a cracked window pane, but with an underlying, desperate note of hunger? Or was it pain? It was hard to tell. It pricked the hairs on my arms, a fleeting, unwelcome sensation. These were not the sounds of healthy, albeit unhappy children. There was something deeply unsettling about them, something that resonated with tales of the uncanny, something not quite human. "Your children?" I asked, keeping my tone light, casual. Heather, who had been staring out at the overgrown gardens, turned slowly. Her face, usually so placid, seemed to close off like a trap door slamming shut. "They are delicate," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "They are not to be disturbed." There was a politeness to her refusal, but an iron finality beneath it, almost a flicker of fierceness in her usually sorrowful eyes. It was a clear piece of foreshadowing, a warning, but I was too arrogant to heed. Kids. Always a complication, a brief flicker of annoyance, a momentary curiosity about these delicate creatures, but the glittering prize of Heather's fortune quickly shoved such thoughts aside. They could be managed, or more likely ignored, until the time was right. My focus on the scam, on the grand prize, made me dismiss these unsettling signs, these strange cries. Time, as they say, is money. And I wasn't getting any younger, nor were Heather's rumored vaults getting any fuller, just sitting there. "My dearest Heather," I'd murmured, stroking her hand. It felt cool, almost clammy, but I ignored that. Why wait? Our love is a rare and precious thing. Let's not delay our happiness. A quick, quiet wedding. No fuss, no fanfare. My impatience was a tangible thing, a hunger to get to the main course. The life insurance. She agreed naturally, with that same sorrowful resignation that I'd come to interpret as pliable melancholy. The ceremony was a brief, somber affair, held in the cavernous, echoing drawing room of Blackwood Manor itself. Then came the delicate matter of securing our future. I broached the subject of life insurance with my usual practiced empathy, framing it as a gesture of profound love and responsibility. One never knows, my love, what tomorrow may bring. We have to protect each other. The policy was substantial enough to make my mouth water. She signed the papers with a quiet, almost imperceptible smile that I, in my supreme confidence, misread as loving compliance. Hook, line, and sinker. The speed of it all, my driving ambition, stood in stark contrast to the ancient, patient aura of Heather and her decaying mansion. I believed I was dictating the terms, controlling the timeline, blissfully unaware that I was merely accelerating my own descent into a trap far older and more patient than I could imagine. With the ink dry, my mind turning to the final act, the balcony. Blackwood Manor boasted several, most in a state of picturesque decay. I'd selected one overlooking the steepest, rockiest part of the overgrown gardens. It was made of ornate ironwork, beautiful and, more importantly, visibly rusted in a few places. A little pressure, a sudden dizzy spell for Heather during a romantic moonlight moment on our honeymoon here at the manor. A tragic slip. I could already picture the headlines filled the satisfying weight of the payout. A bloated, bruised-looking moon hung in the sky, occasionally veiled by scrubbing clouds, casting long, dancing shadows across the overgrown lawns of Blackwood. I was charm personified, playing the doting new husband with an Oscar-worthy performance. A little wine, a few softly spoken endearments, and then the suggestion. My love, the air is so evocative tonight. Shall we take it on the west balcony? The one with the conveniently crumbling infrastructure, of course. My internal monologue was a calm, steady countdown. Each step towards that balcony was a step closer to freedom, to a life of indolent luxury. There was a flicker, a tiny, almost imperceptible tremor in my resolve as we stepped out into the cool night air. A last chance, perhaps, for some vestigial piece of humanity to assert itself. But the image of those zeros on the insurance policy, the sheer intoxicating weight of that future wealth, quickly snuffed it out. My sentences in my mind grew shorter, more focused. As the moment approached, I drew her close, one arm around her waist, the other poised. The wind whispered through the ancient trees, carrying the scent of damp earth and something else, that musky, overripe sweetness that I had associated with Heather. She leaned into me, and then, with a sudden, almost desperate passion that took me by surprise, her arms were around my neck. Her eyes in the dim moonlight seemed to gleam with an unnatural intensity. "Oh, Gerald," she breathed, her voice husky. "I've waited so long." She clung to me, her breath hot against my neck, a low sound vibrating in her chest like a cat's purr, only deeper, resonant. An odd excitement radiated from her, a strange, almost feral energy. And then it began. Not with a scream, not from her. The first sound was a sickening wet tear. Fabric, I thought, her dress. But it was followed by a series of soft, rapid cracks, like twigs snapping or bones. Bones! Her grip on me tightened, and it wasn't the grip of a woman. It was a vice. Sharp points digging into my shoulders. I tried to pull away, a sudden cold dread blooming in my chest, but I was held fast. "Heather?" I stammered, my voice a dry croak. The purring in her chest became a guttural clicking, a chittering that vibrated through my own bones. Her body convulsed against mine. I could feel movement under her skin. Her limbs seemed to elongate, joints popping, reforming as impossible, horrifying angles. Her dress split further, not tearing, but being pushed apart from within, revealing patches of something dark, segmented, and hideously chitinous beneath. What's happening? My carefully constructed composure shattered like glass. Her face, it was pressed against mine. I could feel it changing. The skin stretched, became waxy, then seemed to flow like melting candle wax. Her nose widened, flattened, the nostrils flaring into dark pits. Her eyes, her beautiful, sorrowful eyes, they were multiplying, small, black, glistening orbs erupting across her forehead. Her cheeks spreading like a disease, each one fixing on me with a cold, alien intelligence. A scream tried to fight its way out of my throat, but it died in a strangled gasp. Unable to process the abomination unfolding in my arms. Her arms, too many. Her face, it's not her face. 8 bristling legs, jointed and sharp, unfolded from its new bulbous abdomen. The delicate balcony railing, groaning under the sudden shift in weight. Its multifaceted eyes, dozens of them, all glinted with a predatory light, fixed on me. My limbs were lead, my lungs screaming for air that just wouldn't come. The creature that had been Heather shifted, its many legs finding purchase on the stone of the balcony. The movement both fluid and utterly alien, a sticky, silken strand impossibly strong anchoring me. My pathetic attempts to struggle, to scream, were met with a soft, dry chittering from the monstrous thing before me. A sound that could have been amusement or anticipation. Then from the deep shadows of the mansion, from a doorway I hadn't noticed before, perhaps down the grand rotting staircase, they came. The children. The source of those thin, reedy cries, those unsettling whispers of hunger. They were not children, not human children. Dog-sized they were. Spiders, each a miniature, skittering nightmare version of their mother. Their multiple eyes glinting in the sickly moonlight that filtered through the doorway. Their legs, too many to count in my panicked state, moved with an unnatural, jerky gait, clicking softly on the ancient floorboards. The cries I had dismissed, the sounds I had rationalized, now made horrifying perfect sense. They were the sounds of a hungry, waiting brood. The Heather spider, my monstrous bride, began to drag me, my useless legs scraping against the stone, towards them, towards her offspring. My mind, what was left of it, was a maelstrom of pure, undiluted horror. Not regret for Ashley or Mary or any of the others. No, my regret was purely for myself, for my monumental, fatal arrogance, for believing I was the predator, when all along I was merely the prey, meticulously lured into the web. This was the ultimate con, and I was the mark. The chittering grew louder, a chorus of hunger, a symphony of the damned, and then, the pain, surging up to meet me, filled with clicking jaws, the rustle of too many legs, and endless, empty, obsidian eyes. The last sound I heard, or perhaps imagined, was a soft maternal clicking from the great spider above as her children began to feed, a grotesque lullaby for a feast of fools.
Well, kiddies, it looks like Gerald finally met his 8-legged match. He thought he was so fly, but she had him cornered from the start. He tried to spin a tale of love, but she saw right through his web of lies. You could say his assets were completely liquidated by her digestive juices. He was looking for a sugar mama, but he ended up with a spider mama. Talk about a fatal attraction. He really got caught with his hand in the cookie jar, or in this case, the egg sack. It seems Gerald's life insurance scam didn't have a leg to stand on, especially when faced with 8 of them. He went from debonair to dinner in no time. Until next time, creeps. Try not to get too tangled up in your own schemes, or you might find yourself facing a killer appetite. Pleasant screams.
Tales from the Crypt.